The government says that England's 4-week lockdown could be extended for longer if coronavirus infection rates don't come down enough. But Cabinet Minister Michael Gove says it is his fervent hope that with the strict measures starting Thursday will end on December the 2nd.
If we ensure that all the steps that we're taking now are taken appropriately, we'll have an opportunity in advance of December the 2nd to review the progress that we're making.
With the furlough scheme also extended for lockdown, we hear from businesses and what it might mean for the economy. Survivors in the Turkish city worst hit by the earthquake which killed more than 80 people.
What an incredible achievement for all of you.
And in Italy, win number 93 for Lewis Hamilton helps Mercedes secure a record 7th Constructors' title. Good evening. The 4-week lockdown in England, which will start on Thursday and is scheduled to end on December the 2nd, could last longer. The Cabinet Minister Michael Gove said ministers will be guided by the facts. He said the government wanted to get the coronavirus reproduction rate below the critical level of 1. The strict measures are set to come into effect on Thursday. They will see pubs, restaurants, gyms and non-essential shops and places of worship close. However, schools, colleges and universities can stay open. Travel and overnight stays in the UK and abroad will be restricted, and meeting others indoors or in private gardens is banned. Today, Labour criticised the government for rejecting its call last month for a so-called circuit breaker, where a tight set of restrictions would have been implemented for a fixed period of time. This report from our political correspondent Jonathan Blake contains flash photography.
A round of golf while it's still allowed. Here in Hertfordshire, only the minimum restrictions are currently in place. But like the rest of England, people are now preparing for a new national lockdown.
I think it's frustrating here because the cases aren't that bad and we have all been, following the rules that we were given. Golf's just been so fantastic for so many people.
So while people may not agree with it, we got to stick with it. So it's a bit frustrating, yes, but rules are rules.
Well, I wasn't surprised. I think it was inevitable. I'm glad that they're keeping the schools open, but I think it was needed, really.
The lockdown is due to last until the 2nd of December, but a senior government minister said that was a hope, not a guarantee, and left open the option of restrictions staying in place for longer.
If we ensure that all the steps that we're taking now are taken appropriately, we'll have an opportunity in advance of December the 2nd to review the progress that we're making, and in advance of December the 2nd, we can then communicate to those areas where some restrictions may be required, what they will be, and also other areas where we've managed to beat back the virus, we can explain where liberties can be restored.
Labour say they'll support the plan, but their leader is adamant it should have happened sooner.
If what they announced yesterday had been announced when I said it should have been 2 or 3 weeks ago, we could have had the lockdown and schools shut because of the natural break of half term. And people will be waking up this morning and thinking, how on earth did it get to this? The government has to keep its side of the bargain here, because if they don't use this time to fix, test, trace and isolate, then I think the 2nd of December will be a review date, not an end date.
Some Conservative MPs remain unconvinced that a lockdown is needed now and may yet vote against it in the House of Commons this week. With Labour's backing, the plan is likely to pass. But that won't end the debate about whether this month-long lockdown is the right thing to do and where England will be at the end of it. One scientist advising the government said a return to regional restrictions may be unrealistic.
What mustn't happen is whenever that date comes, 2nd of December or a little bit later, that suddenly the world goes back to normal. It's not going to go back to normal immediately. I think it will be at least what is currently called Tier 3 or Tier 3 plus across the country. I don't think it makes sense to go back into regional variation in the restrictions that are in place immediately after this set of more draconian measures are lifted.
Schools are staying open, unlike during the national lockdown earlier in the year. Some argue that means it may take longer to bring the virus back under control. Although some areas have been living under tighter restrictions for some time, this week will bring new limitations for everyone in England. What was the government's last resort has become a reality. Jonathan Blake, BBC News.
The latest government figures show there were 23,254 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. That means that the average number of new cases reported per day in the last week is now 23,016. 162 deaths were reported. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. It means, on average, in the past week, 260 deaths were announced every day. It takes the total number of deaths so far across the UK to 46,717. This latest lockdown has been prompted by the recent rises in infection rates. But what are the other key indicators which would allow restrictions to be eased? Here's our health correspondent Lauren Moss.
From Thursday, the message in England will once again be stay home to save lives. Non-essential shops and hospitality will close. Schools and universities will stay open. The Prime Minister has said the measures are to prevent a medical disaster of the NHS being overwhelmed.
Well, I think the Prime Minister had no choice but to act on very clear evidence that the trajectory of hospital admissions, demand of the health service was such that we just would have been overwhelmed in the coming weeks, to the point that it wouldn't just be a case of not managing the surge in patients with COVID, but actually the NHS would not have been able to provide services to large numbers of non-COVID patients.
There are more than 9,000 people with COVID in English hospitals. Some, including those in Liverpool, Lancashire and Nottinghamshire, are treating more coronavirus patients now than during the peak in the first wave. Getting the reproduction number of the virus below 1 is crucial. Anything above that means it's spreading.
In September, scientists looked at the effect different interventions could have on the R number, which is thought to be around 1.2 at the minute. A full lockdown, like we had in March, that included schools closing, would have the biggest impact. It's thought the measures introduced in the spring reduced the R by around 75%. They estimated closing pubs, restaurants, bars and cafes would have a moderate impact on transmission, bringing R down by around 0.1 to 0.2. And they also considered the closure of non-essential retail and found that on its own this would have a minimal impact. There is a level of uncertainty around these figures, and they're based on data before cases reach the severity they're at now. But it's hoped the measures being introduced will bring that R number down.
Lockdown isn't a long-term solution, though.
You have to use it as an opportunity to improve the test, trace and isolation, and that is an exit strategy. And until we get mass testing up and running with fast turnarounds, and it's the fast turnaround, there's no use having a system that waits 5 days for a test result to come, because you can't get ahead of the virus.
The Prime Minister has promised that a rollout of rapid testing, which will give results within 15 minutes, is imminent. Care has also advanced since March. The sickest patients can now be treated with the steroid dexamethasone, and some Nightingale hospitals are on standby. Many hopes are pinned on a vaccine, with scientists predicting positive results by the end of the year. Until then, reducing the spread of the virus and limiting its effect are the only ways of indicating how long this latest lockdown will last. Lauren Moss, BBC News.
A one-month lockdown will cost the government billions of pounds in extra support for businesses and employees. Our business correspondent Katie Austin has been analysing where the money will be spent and what impact it will have.
When pubs and restaurants have to shut, there's an impact the diners don't see for firms in the supply chain, like this Hampshire food wholesaler.
We depend on hospitality for about 80% of our trade, and the other 20% is care homes, hospitals, schools. So this is a big body blow.
Takeaways will still be allowed, to the relief of the owner of this restaurant in Essex.
We'll simply revert our business back to takeaway and delivery, and hopefully we'll be doing a lot better than when we did early part of the year.
And what about jobs? Furlough continuing will undoubtedly save many of them, but it comes too late for others. Airport worker Jake got his redundancy notice this week.
It was gut-wrenching when I got it, and obviously at the moment with with the fact that we're entering a second lockdown, finding another job is ultimately going to be quite difficult.
People being told not to travel abroad is another blow to aviation, while the shutdown comes just when retailers hoped to benefit from pre-Christmas shopping. The original furlough scheme cost at least £40 billion, and the extended version looks set to add further billions to that price tag. There'll also be grants available to businesses in England which are forced to close, up to £3,000 a month. And there's an extension to mortgage holidays for struggling homeowners. Again, the government is spending to try and minimise the damage of its restrictions.
Even before yesterday's announcement, the government had committed something in the order of £200 billion to support the economy over this year. Now, that is a staggering big number. Additional amounts over the next, if it's just another month, will be a relatively small fraction of that. But again, if this is 2 or 3 or 4 months, that's going to push that number from 200 billion up into the 210, 220, 230 billion.
In April, under the first lockdown, the UK economy shrank by 1/5. That sort of figure isn't expected again this time, but some industries fear a bleak winter. Katie Austin, BBC News.
Rescue teams are continuing to search for around 100 people missing since Friday's earthquake, which struck Turkey's Aegean coast and several Greek islands. At least 62 people were killed and thousands have been made homeless. In the Turkish city of Izmir, survivors have been pulled out of the rubble of collapsed buildings, including a 70-year-old. Our international correspondent Orla Guerin reports from the scene.
They have been praying here for miracle rescues. Overnight, they got one. A 70-year-old man called Ahmed Chitim, who had been buried for 33 hours, carried out alive. He was reclaimed from this, the wreckage of an 8-storey apartment block called the Riza Bay, now all but erased from the landscape. A local official told us residents were worried and asked for an inspection over a year ago. It concluded the building wouldn't survive an earthquake.
Well, the search is continuing here hour after hour. The rubble is several stories high. And standing here, seeing all of this crushed concrete, it's hard to imagine that anyone else could be brought out alive. But the teams are still searching by hand, with heavy equipment and with dogs. And nearby, relatives are keeping an anguished vigil. Many haven't left the site since the moment of the earthquake at 2:51 p.m. on Friday afternoon. May I ask you for your family?
Ardeel Tanner is one of them, waiting for news of his beloved sister. Asla worked in a dental office on the ground floor of the building.
My sister's university friend and another friend every time called me, writing on Instagram, on phone, every time writing, call me, every people call me. We are just waiting.
Some here are still clinging to hope, but the death toll is rising. And across this earthquake-prone country, many are now asking, could we be next? Orla Guerin, BBC News, Izmir.
England World Cup winner and Manchester United legend Sir Bobby Charlton has been diagnosed with dementia. Sir Bobby spent 17 years at Old Trafford, winning 3 league titles. His wife Norma said she hopes the diagnosis could help others. The news follows the deaths with dementia of his older brother Jack in July and fellow World Cup winner Nobby Stiles on Friday. Manchester City retained the Women's FA Cup after beating Everton 3-1 in extra time at Wembley. Despite a string of excellent saves from Everton goalkeeper Sandy McKiver, Georgia Stanway put the holders ahead before Janine Becky sealed the victory, City lifting the trophy for a 3rd time. All talk in Formula One recently has been about breaking records, and it was another one that was secured today. Lewis Hamilton's victory at Imola helped seal a record 7th successive constructors' title for Mercedes, and that win also puts Hamilton on the brink of a 7th drivers' title, as Adam Wilde reports.
This was Formula One's return to Italy's famed Imola circuit, a fitting place for Lewis Hamilton, who at every corner this season makes a little more history. As he races towards another world title, the teams surrounding him are setting records of their own.
Lights out and away we go!
Mercedes entirely dominant, although it was their other driver, Valtteri Bottas, who started out front. But the strength of the team is in the strategy as well as the speed. And when others made their stops, Hamilton just kept going, leaving all the other drivers and the drama behind. Max Verstappen crashing out started a chaotic few moments. Britain's George Russell inexplicably losing control behind the safety car. And even in the pits, the problems persisted. But for Hamilton, no such issues, leading home a Mercedes 1-2, and yet more history.
7 consecutive Constructors' Championships for Mercedes.
What an incredible achievement.
Another win for Hamilton, another title for Mercedes, Formula One's unstoppable force. Adam Wilde, BBC News.
There's more throughout the evening on the BBC News channel. We're back with the late news at 10. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Goodbye.